Hello and welcome. Today's webinar is Building Capacity in Gateway Communities through the NAR Academy. My name is Lacey Friedley. I am the Communications Coordinator at Portland State University's Transportation Research and Education Center. TREC leads the National Institute for Transportation and Communities, a university transportation center funded by the U.S. Department of Transportation. NITC consortium members, in addition to PSU, are the University of Utah, University of Oregon, University of Arizona, University of Texas at Arlington, and the Oregon Institute of Technology. NITC's research priority is improving mobility of people and goods to build strong communities. Our presenters today are Jordan Katcher and Elizabeth Sodja of the Gateway and Natural Amenity Region, or NAR, initiative. Jordan Katcher is an initiatives facilitator for the Wallace Stegner Center Environmental Dispute Resolution Program and an adjunct instructor within the City and Metropolitan Planning Department at the University of Utah. She serves as facilitator and operations manager for the Gateway and Natural Amenity Region NAR initiative, facilitates community conversations, conducts situation assessments, and provides training and coaching related to conflict management and collaborative process design. Elizabeth Sodja is the program coordinator for the NAR initiative at Utah State University Extension. She has a decade of communications and community outreach experience and has worked with federal, state, and local government agencies. Before joining NAR, she worked for USU's Center for Community Engagement and the National Park Service. Before diving into the presentation, I'd like to let you know about an upcoming data workshop hosted by TREC at Portland State University. June 17th, 18th, and 20th, join us at PSU for a 3-day introductory in-person workshop on databases and SQL. Today's presentation will be about 40 minutes long, then we will have 15 minutes to answer your questions. During the presentation, please submit your questions via the Zoom Q&A. After the webinar, you will receive an email with a link to the video recording and presentation slides. If you are tracking professional development hours, this webinar is eligible for 1 hour of continuing education credit. A certificate of completion will be posted on the event page within 24 hours after the webinar ends. And with that, I will turn it over to our presenters.
Thank you so much, Lacey, and thank you, NITC, for the opportunity to showcase the work that we've been doing over the last several years. Welcome to our webinar on building capacity in gateway communities through the NAR initiative. Like Lacey mentioned, your presenters today are Elizabeth Sodja and myself, Jordan Katcher. And as you can see from our logos, it's 2 different institutions, Utah State and the University of Utah. And we're really excited to talk about how we've been working collaboratively to support gateway communities throughout the West. Our little overview for the 40 minutes today includes a couple different sections. So we'd like to start out by talking about what are NARs. When we say NAR, what do we actually mean? What are we studying? Then we'll segue over to our work specifically and what we're trying to do to address these challenges. And then we get to showcase our flagship effort known as the NAR Academy. And in particular, we'll be running through our fundamentals course, which we're very, very excited to show you all today. And before we kind of get into all the things, we've actually opened up the chat because we'd love to connect with you as humans. And so if you are able to type in the chat, we would love to hear about where you're based and what you're hoping to learn in this webinar today. And it's okay if you only want to do one of the prompts or both or whatever is most comfortable for you. But yeah, where are you tuning into today? We'd love to kind of see where you're at. Ooh, we've got someone from Atlanta, Georgia. San Mateo County, California. Helena, Montana. Cheyenne. Oh, hi, Lonnie. Good to see you in Wyoming. Seattle, LA County, Multnomah County, Oregon. All beautiful, beautiful spots. Chatham County, North Carolina. So fun to see where you all are tuning in from. Chicago suburbs. Isn't that so cool? We can just be online and all connected at the same time. That's so beautiful. Thank you so much for engaging with the chat, just sharing where you're coming from. And we're going to have a couple more prompts throughout our presentation just to engage with you a little bit more. So thank you for participating. So I'm going to kick us off by talking about NARs and sort of showcasing what they are and what we mean when we talk about them. So in particular, you might have heard the word NAR or the term shredding the NAR. I have not had a lot of experience shredding the NAR in particular, but the whole concept of, working through a lot of obstacles and having a lot of success through it really resonates with our work in particular, and thinking about how to take really gnarly challenges and help to address them for the betterment of all. And so our initiative, NAR, actually is an acronym. So it stands for Gateway Natural Amenity Region. So when we say gateway, we mean a gateway to a state or a national park or a national forest, a recreation area, cultural heritage site, or any other kind of prominent public land site. And the natural amenity, meaning that both the community and the economic development is really closely tied to that landscape and those natural assets that are utilized for recreation and tourism and outdoor-based leisure. And then it's also part of a bigger area. So we think of the region of it outside of the jurisdictional boundaries of whatever the community is as part of a larger region with similar attributes or some sort of resort-like kind of community. And when you're thinking about NARs or NAR communities, you might be thinking about, in particular, communities such as Moab, Utah, South Lake Tahoe, California, Nevada, Park City, Utah, Sandpoint, Idaho, right? These communities that are fairly small, that are beautiful, pristine areas where they're really attracting a lot of outdoor engagement and well-being throughout those surroundings. And so I'm curious for you all, I'm thinking about tuning into a NAR Gateway kind of webinar. What NAR community is your favorite, or maybe one of your favorites? Because it's very difficult to choose just one. I've got lots, but if you think about it for yourself, are there small towns that have natural amenities, maybe near national parks or scenic rivers, or just areas across the U.S. that you, that you really gravitate towards and find meaning and connection to? So we'd love if you're interested in just throwing in the chat, what those NAR communities are. Ooh, Colorado Springs, a Garden of the Gods, beautiful. Hood River, yes, absolutely gorgeous, right along the river there. Cody, Wyoming, I've heard beautiful, beautiful things, Lonnie. I'd love to visit. Whistler, I've heard all some great things about Whistler. Ooh, Copper Harbor, Michigan for Isle Rat. Ooh, National Park. Ooh, up in the UP area. Sounds delightful, right? There's all these beautiful locations. Waldrug, South Dakota. Ooh, I used to live in North Dakota, so I'd love to. South Dakota, I honestly, everywhere across this country is beautiful. We're really so fortunate. Florence, Oregon. Ooh, yeah. Florence is so nice along the coast. Beautiful, beautiful spots. Thank you for sharing some of your locations. I have a whole handful of ones that I really resonate with too, and they're just really beautiful, special places. And in our work, we try to preserve those as much as we can. So thank you for engaging in that chat. So thinking about NARs and studying NARs, within both of our institutions, a couple of things have been happening throughout the last several years that have sort of contributed to a number of growth and development challenges within NARs. In particular, within the state of Utah, where we are based, we had the Mighty Five campaign that was done through our Office of Tourism, which was extremely successful in getting a lot of new tourists and visitors visiting our 5 national parks. And it also created an onslaught of additional challenges because of that too. In addition to what we were also experiencing in Utah, we were starting to see a lot of growth in national parks in these communities all throughout the West. We started to observe how, congestion, parking concerns, how to mobilize and get people from point A to point B was all of a sudden becoming much more of a struggle with these communities that tended to not have as many visitors as before. And then even for us too in Utah, it was like some of our smaller communities that had these assets that were really treasured by locals were all of a sudden kind of becoming more at the forefront. So we had more of an onslaught of visitors that were then coming to these areas and just putting a lot of pressure and use on those landscapes. And so you kind of have, we're starting to see all of these different components happening both within our state and also within the West more broadly. And in 2018, NITC had funded a study for us to kind of explore what these types of communities were grappling with. So as researchers, we had been observing them firsthand, secondhand, through storytelling and whatnot. And now we wanted to kind of get into the data and talk to the communities themselves and figure out, like, what are you experiencing? So we conducted a study on planning and development challenges in Western NAR communities. And we were asking, how pervasive are these issues across the Western NAR communities? And also, on top of that, how are NAR communities experiencing and dealing with these issues? What are they doing? What are they trying? So through this study, we were able to identify and create a database of Western NAR communities all throughout the Intermountain West. We were also able to conduct interviews of public officials in 25 NAR communities, and we took a survey of public officials from those NAR communities as well. And through that research, we essentially defined what is a NAR community. So our team defines that as a small town under 25,000 in population, within close proximity to natural amenities, within 10 miles of, say, a national park or a monument, and not in an urbanized area. So further than 15 miles from a census designated urbanized area. And from that, we created this database and we kind of highlighted, okay, where are these communities scattered across the West? So we had identified over 1,500 communities, almost split half and half almost, with 821 incorporated, 701 census designated places, 30.6% of Mountain West communities, and 61.1% of small Mountain West communities. So what did we find through that 2018 study? We found big city problems in small rural towns and regions, and some really unique challenges related to affordability and availability of housing, traffic, congestion, parking, insufficient or overwhelmed infrastructure and public services, employee recruitment and retention struggles, environmental and natural amenity impacts, particularly disasters, economic vulnerability and the need for diversification, loss of community character, questions about the role of tourism and tourism marketing, reduced quality of the visitor experience, unique social, cultural, and political dynamics, on top of challenging local, regional, state, and federal relationships. And so throughout all of that, through doing the research and talking to these communities, we also realized that a number of them were saying that they don't want to become like Vail or Aspen or Breckenridge or Jackson, or Moab is the one that we hear more often in Utah. Or they don't want to become a tourist trap or a big city. And then also some communities were really concerned about becoming an abandoned small town and sort of being left in the dust. And so on top of all of that, right, we've conducted this study, we're looking at all these impacts, and then something happens in 2020 where all of a sudden these communities are grappling with a pandemic. And at first we were questioning, can these communities even endure this kind of situation? But then on top of that, we also saw the rise in Zoom towns. And so all of a sudden you had individuals from the cities moving into these smaller communities that have higher incomes, that are able to work remote, and are also kind of using up a lot of the housing stock there and just creating a lot of difference and change within these communities fairly rapidly when they're already experiencing a lot of change through the pandemic as well. And so with that, I'm going to let Liz kick it off and essentially talk about how we started and what we're trying to do to address these challenges for these communities.
Thank you, Jordan. So I'm the coordinator of the NAR initiative at Utah State. So Jordan's my colleague at the University of Utah. And yeah, so this study really kicked off Dr. Ramore at the University of Utah to want to try and provide resources for these communities to address these challenges. And so the mission of the NAR initiative is the NAR initiative exists to help Western NAR communities thrive and preserve the things that make them special. That is our goal. That's through everything we try and do. So we started at the University of Utah with that foundational 2018 data. However, while the University of Utah is excellent at research, it doesn't have the same community outreach infrastructure as Utah State does, because Utah State is Utah's land-grant university, and so it has the extension infrastructure throughout the state. And so NAR is actually a partnership between the two universities through our Institute of Outdoor Recreation and Tourism and Utah State Extension and the Environmental Dispute Resolution Program at the University of Utah. So we're a pretty small and feisty team. So Jordan and I are the only paid staff. And then we have Dr. Ramore at the University of Utah, Jordan Smith through the Institute of Outdoor Rec and Tourism at Utah State, and Jake Powell through Extension at Utah State, who are kind of our co-directors. And they help do the research and give us some vision so that we can execute and help provide resources to the community. So how we decide what sorts of resources to provide, we have 3 pillars. So there's research, education, and capacity building. So a couple quick examples in our research. So we had that 2018 study, and then in 2021, we got an additional NITC study to, as Jordan mentioned, kind of there was a pandemic, and what did the pandemic and COVID-19 do to exacerbate the challenges that we had already measured in those 2018 survey. So we expanded our pool from just the Intermountain West to the West Coast, actually. So it did up the number of communities included to include the coastal communities. And some of the feedback is not very surprising. And some of the feedback was, when we compared it to the 2018 data, pretty surprising in some ways. A lot of the problems that we saw in 2018 were exacerbated. So provision and maintenance of basic infrastructure in 2020 and 2021, trailheads, a lot of national parks hit visitation records, so their traffic and congestion went through the roof. Lack of developable land is a big one as well, because these communities are so close to public lands. It's what makes them so beautiful and wonderful. It also limits how far they can grow and how far they can expand to try and take pressure off of their main community cores. There's community conflict over the density of development. If a lot of their identity is tied into being a small town, and so when you try and build denser to accommodate some of the pressure, that density can cause a lot of frustration for people who have been there for a while because they feel like it's changing very quickly. And then insufficient internet service is also a big challenge, especially when they are trying to diversify their economy. Related to this audience and transportation, traffic and congestion and parking related issues, they, from moderately challenging to above, both cross the 40% threshold, but they aren't the biggest challenges facing these communities in the development sector. In economic challenges, not surprising, housing affordability is number one. Housing affordability was the number one issue in the 2018 study as well. However, in this follow-up study in 2018, below 30% said it was extremely challenging. That bumped up to 50%, said it was extremely challenging, and almost 90% of communities are saying this is moderately challenging or more severe, which is a pretty startling stat. There's the imbalance of the local average wage compared to the cost of living. It's hard to be a bartender or a barista in Aspen and live in Aspen. It's actually impossible. The math doesn't math. And then difficulties associated with local workforce recruitment and retention. A lot of these businesses, even the ski resorts, they have amazing jobs and they can't find the workers because the workers can't find a place to live. And lack of economic diversification can be a big challenge. Governance challenges. This is the one that we really keyed in on, along with the previous data we shared, to help inform us as we developed the NAR Academy, because it's the local leaders who we are really trying to target with this resource. So, lack of local government resources and revenues. Over 60% of communities, this is a challenge, and over 20%, this is an extreme challenge. They just do not have the resources to address the challenges they're seeing. Difficulties associated with local government employee recruitment and retention. So for example, Grand County in Moab, Utah, they've hired several city managers, community development directors over recent years, and they haven't been able to actually get them inside the door because they can't find a place to live, or when they do get inside the door, they've encountered challenges beyond what they were planning on encountering, and it's made it really challenging to stay. Insufficient government staffing capacity. If you're a town of 500, but you're seeing over 1 million vehicles, your staff of maybe 7 people, if you're lucky, can sometimes not feel completely up to the challenge of managing that. There's a lot of anti-growth sentiment, a lot of blaming tourism sometimes, and the promotion of that for challenges. And there's a lack of long-range planning for a lot of the communities that weren't wrestling with these challenges before the pandemic. They now are kind of caught in a speedy, rapid change without any pre-planning that's happened. I've also highlighted 3 other ones that helped inform our academy that we're going to talk about in a moment. Community distrust of local government. This one went up a lot between the 2018 and the 2021 survey. I think especially in the small, more rural communities, this can be a really big challenge for government folks as they try and navigate change, prepare for change, while also navigating, more global, national trends in the social and political spheres. Lack of collaboration among regional jurisdictions. So if they do or do not have a relationship with their local federal partners, and then community perception that planning is a bad thing. This one, it's not extremely challenging for many communities, but over 20% of communities did say this is moderately challenging, that people think planning, plan is a bit of a 4-letter word in some places. And so that can cause a bit of a challenge when you are trying to plan. So one thing we also try and do is we try and act as a hub to share cool, innovative things that communities are doing to try and address their challenges out to other communities. So I know, some of you guys are from the Chicago suburbs, but we've actually found these little small places have really cool ideas that can scale up. And some of the bigger challenges or practices that are happening in metropolitan areas, they can be repackaged and work in these places. So we're just wondering, is there anything interesting or any unique strategies being tried in your organization or others that you've heard about or done research to address similar challenges that maybe your community has faced? Even if your community is a big metropolitan area. Oh, Jason, that's a really good question. If you want to, I'm not sure we have a good answer, but you can drop it in the Q&A as well. And we can chat about it at the end too. All right. I don't know if anyone has any really cool strategies, but if you guys think of anything that your community is doing that's really awesome, like, oh yeah, we tackled a parking challenge by trying this cool thing, or tactical urbanism in this interesting way, feel free to share that in the chat. We'd love to look at it afterward. In terms of capacity building, we have an online toolkit. It is currently under construction at the moment. So, if you do go try and check it out, this is basically for those communities with really limited capacity. If they barely realize, say, short-term rentals are a growing trend in their community and they're trying to manage them, we try and have example ordinances, example programs on there that they can use to get started so they don't feel like they have to reinvent the wheel every time, especially when a lot of communities have been grappling with these challenges a lot longer. So we try and share best practices there. We also have a gnarly blog. This is where we try and get communities chatting with each other and share really cool stuff. Not just communities, actually, also academics. So back in 2021, Stephanie Smith from the University of Arizona actually wrote a gnarly blog for us, how to map your workforce commuter shed in ArcGIS online. And she did a really great step-by-step analysis of, if you work in Springdale, Utah, which is a gateway to Zion National Park, how many people live in Springdale and how far are they coming from? And when you map it, it's actually astounding. There are a number of people who are commuting over an hour from Cedar City or St. George to come and work in Springdale. So this was pretty cool. We also have done webinar series in the past, which have had a lot of traction and online. You can go check those out on our YouTube. And in the fall, we're partnering with the Institute of Outdoor Recreation and Tourism to put on a base camp conference. So this is a regional conference. It's kind of like the National Outdoor Recreation Conference, if any of you guys have done that, but with a very regional focus in the Intermountain West. And so trying to bring together outdoor recreation planners for the first half of the conference and gateway community planners and leaders for the second half of the conference. And then in the middle day, we're going to have a facilitated workshop, actually, which Jordan and some of the folks from the Environmental Dispute Resolution Program at the U are going to help facilitate around conflict training, how to navigate conflict, because conflict, not just in gateway communities, but across the country is something that we are encountering a little bit more of, and people don't always feel prepared to navigate well. And so we're going to have a conflict training before breaking into some workshops around some really key issue areas for our communities. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Jordan.
Thank you, Liz. So this brings us to the NITC Academy. So for our team specifically, like Liz mentioned, we're very small. Liz and I are the only paid employees that are a part of the NAR initiative, and we have the support of 3 wonderful co-directors. And we've been thinking a lot about, okay, we're doing these webinars and we're trying to present at conferences, and we're trying to get this research just out there. And for Liz and I that have backgrounds that are more as a practitioner than a researcher, one of our biggest desires is to take what's happening in academia and make it accessible and on the ground. And so we were dreaming up of ways to do this. We're like, how do we help support, over 1,500 communities throughout the West? How do we give them these insights and share the information that we've been researching and also learning from interacting with so many of these communities? And so we have come together through the support of NITC to launch the NAR Academy, which we are so stoked about. The purpose of the NAR Academy is that it's an online library that seeks to fill in the gap between what community leaders and practitioners have the capacity for and what their communities need by providing accessible training around critical topic areas to help communities better understand and advocate for their own needs. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of trial and error. And we just want to get more of this information out there. No one community has solved all of these challenges that we've kind of outlined already. And yet they're doing some really awesome, innovative things, and they're really trying. And it's a great opportunity to be able to showcase those, and a great honor to be able to, just show what's happening on the ground. So we have 4 goals associated with this academy that really stem from the research that we conducted that was supported by NITC. And in particular, we wanted to make this NAR Academy very specific for these communities. So our first goal was essentially to create low barrier training that's accessible for gateway community leaders. We wanted them to be able to plug in at any point in time to access information, and not just have a solely in-person event or something that may be a little bit more inaccessible. We want them to be able to reach it, whether they're during working hours or afterwards, but at any point, just making it accessible. Second, we wanted to cover planning topics and challenges from that small rural gateway specific lens. Our team did some research on incredible resources that are related to everything from transportation to housing to land use. And yet we weren't able to find a lot that were specifically geared towards this audience. And so that's what makes the Academy unique in that way. Third, we really wanted to provide opportunities for communities to network and meet with others that are working on similar projects, building relationships, talking to each other, being open and vulnerable about what's happening, and having really real, honest conversations and supporting each other, and having that mentoring, that network for themselves to really support each other, right? It's really important when you can relate to other communities that are grappling with what you're grappling with. And then fourth, increase community capacity to become more self-sustaining and resilient to their unique challenges. And to really have this, instead of like all of this is happening to us, like figuring out how to empower their community to say, okay, these things are happening, and how do we navigate them in a way that serves our community the most and doesn't feel like it's being taken on them. And so, where to begin? So within our academy, we were like, okay, as you saw, there's a lot of challenges around transportation and housing and land use and conflict and collaboration. There's just a lot. So it was like, where do we start? Which hot topic do we kind of create a course for? And how do we do this in a way that's beneficial for all these communities? So as our team thought about it, we were actually like, you know what? Regardless of whatever challenge you have at hand, there's actually a set of information that's really applicable for any of these communities, regardless of their challenge. And so we decided that we would make a prerequisite course called Fundamentals that would essentially cover everything that we would hope a gateway community would know and understand before they start to tackle a number of these challenges. And so as you can see from the visual here, we have 7 lessons. Lesson 1 captures what is in our community, so talking more about our research and the unique attributes of these locations. Second is finding and following your North Star. So if if as a community you haven't talked about who you are or who you're becoming or who you want to be, it's really difficult to be able to plan for that kind of future. And so we talk about, what does it actually look like to use your values as your North Star? Lesson 3 talks about the fundamentals of conflict and collaboration. We're not really taught as a society how to navigate through conflict or how to collaborate effectively. And so we want to bring the skills that are applicable for everyone, both professionally and personally, into their lives to help them work through these challenges. 4 is on assessing what the situation is ready for. A lot of the times, we live in a society where we get money and we have to do things very quickly and it's just go, go, go. And we kind of take a step back in our work and we say, hey, let's take an assessment. Let's figure out what has happened in the past. What's actually going on? What are people's ideas? What are their dreams? Let's capture more information. That way we have a more robust and thorough and holistic project ahead of us. Lesson 5 is on empowering community engagement. So how to not just rely on your elected officials or staff to navigate your issues and your challenges. I mean, if you're a community with 3 part-time staff, there's no way they're going to be able to solve all the issues. And so how do you leverage the potential of your community to help be a part of that problem-solving enterprise? Lesson 6 is also about working across boundaries. So not being limited to your jurisdictional borders or boundaries, or thinking that others in the county or regional governments might not be able to help you when they totally can. So it's like, how to build those relationships and how to leverage the assets that you all have together. And then lastly, with lesson 7, it's all about charting your gnarly future. There's a lot of uncertainty ahead of us, right? We didn't see COVID happening. And so what else is around the corner? So being able to be flexible and adaptable to an ever-changing environment while also feeling empowered in the decisions that they're making. So this is a little quick visual of what it looks like. Elizabeth is going to give us a run through more in depth in just a moment, but we've utilized the Canvas platform since we are part of USU Extension. And Elizabeth has done a beautiful job at creating all the images and graphics for this course. So with the course in particular, once you complete the fundamentals course, you do receive a digital certificate from USU Extension, a digital badge for your LinkedIn profile, access to facilitated peer-to-peer learning and networking with other participants, access to an online LinkedIn group of other NAR community leaders who have taken the NAR Academy courses, as well as 7 certified maintenance credits for those that are AICP certified planners. And very special for you all on this call today, the course is available now. It is $100, and we are currently running a coupon code, all uppercase Trailblazer 25 for 25% off for the first 50 registrants. And you can use that QR code there as well to access that training if you're interested. And we would really love, whether it's applicable for you, your colleagues, others that are working in these communities that may want to benefit from it. We would just love and appreciate any outreach that could be shared related to this project. And with that, I'm going to give it over to Elizabeth to walk us through kind of what this fundamental course looks like on the ground.
Thanks, Jordan. Let me try and share my screen again. Can you guys see that? That was a bit odd. Yeah, so I'm going to walk through the course now. We obviously, the first part of our presentation was what is in our community, what parameters we use to define what the communities are we work with. So starting on lesson 2, finding and following your North Star. So if you couldn't tell already, we have a lot of fun with our acronym, and we like to make things fun and accessible also for our learners in the course. And so, really using the North Star, community values and community visioning as a concept has been pretty popular in the planning sector for decades. And so how do we tailor that and reframe that for a small rural community specific setting? And so that's what we've tried to do in this lesson. And at the end of every lesson, we also share community examples that we feel like really exemplify this idea really well. So for, finding and following your North Star, Crested Butte, Colorado in 2022, they created their first comprehensive plan. And it doesn't have any zoning in it actually yet, but they created what they're calling the community compass. If you guys read a lot of general plans, I encourage you to go check it out. It's only 30 pages and it's pretty radical. It's a complete reframing on what community planning is, and it really emphasizes like what are our core community values when we have to come up against hard challenges that we're going to, navigate. For example, they can't grow anymore. They've reached the edge of their community boundaries, and so if they want to keep growing their population and support their workforce, they're going to have to do redevelopment. And they have a really beautiful historic downtown. They're an old mining community that they're so proud of, and they have some really stringent historic preservation codes. And that historic preservation might butt up against this redevelopment if they want to keep their community vital. And so what are the community values that are going to guide them, the community leaders and the community members, as they come up against these really thorny challenges that don't have a clear-cut solution? And they have 4. So we are an authentic community. We are accountable for preserving our community. Our community is connected, and we are bold. So authentic, accountable, connected, and bold are their core community values. They engage, they're a pretty small town, so 1,300 residents, and they engaged through this process 1,700 people. So they went into the county because Crested Butte is kind of that economic generator for Gunnison County, Colorado, and they expanded beyond their borders. So what do people in our region think? And it was a pretty cool process. And we share some other community examples as well. Lesson 3, fundamentals of conflict and collaboration. Really, diving into why conflict, it's uncomfortable, and it's actually where good stuff happens. Conflict is where we can wrestle with people who see things differently from us and come to a solution that can help our community navigate some of these challenges. But it's only going to be if we engage with the people who see differently than us and stop avoiding them or yelling at them across the aisle or across the Twitter feed or across the whatever, community Facebook page. Really trying to find skills to, one, reframe conflict from a bad thing to a constructive thing and a tool, and then how do we collaborate together in the face of that? Lesson 4, assessing what the situation is ready for. This really emphasizes the idea of a situation assessment, because if you are, one example of this is in Utah, for example, there were 2 state departments, our historical preservation and our CDO. Jordan, I got the story from you, so tell me if I'm remembering this wrong, but one put out a big statewide survey to see what rural communities needed, and then like 3 weeks later, the other one put out a big statewide survey to see what rural communities needed. And if they had talked with each other to see who's doing what, who has resources for what, they could have collaborated on that and sent out one survey, because survey fatigue is a real thing. Same with a small little town in a county. They may think, man, we're the only ones dealing with housing affordability, or our trailhead is insane. What are we going to do about it? Their traffic and the parking is all the way down into the neighborhood. And maybe actually the local Forest Service has already conducted a traffic management study and is trying to figure out, like, man, what are we going to do to manage the traffic there? We're going to have to talk to the neighborhood, but we don't have a relationship there. And so actually, if you talk to people, all the regional partners and players, there may be more resources, there may already be data. And so really helping people look at the full landscape of what's around you before you tackle a challenge, so you can make sure you're being as strategic as possible. Lesson 5, empowering community engagement. Really trying to find ways to not approach community engagement as a check the box activity or something that's required by either federal code or the NEPA process or the state code, but as something that can actually help as they navigate challenges, and bringing the community along, so that the community is aware, one, of what leaders are trying to do, but also that, if you're not willing to show up before you're really angry, if you're not willing to show up while we're having the discussions, unfortunately, you're not going to have a voice, because it's going to be too late, because there are balls in motion. And so really helping your community understand the process, and like, we need you to show up early and often and to make your voice heard, because at past a certain threshold, things have to move forward. And really, let's try and do it all together. Jasper, Alberta, Canada has done a great version of this, we actually think. So they do an age-based outreach and community guide. So when people move into their community, they developed a community guide, like, hey, if you're, 65 or older, here's all of our cool senior citizen activities. If you're in, the young family period, here are some cool teen activities. Here are some cool kid activities. Here's where, here are our summer club groups so that you can plug your kids in there. Here are our daycare resources that are around. Here are our mental health resources, and just really helping plug the community members in as they come in so that they know, hey, the community's here for you. Here's what all of you can do to connect with each other and connect with us as your leaders. And even simple things like, how do I send and receive mail? For some of these more rural communities, that's not as straightforward as like put it in your mailbox. It's actually a whole different process. So that's a really cool example we share there. Lesson 6, working across boundaries, that regional collaboration, working regionally on that lens. If a community is frustrated with something happening on the local national forest or in the national park, but the forest manager or the park superintendent is not in the room during those conversations, they are very limited in what they can do. And so really making sure that you have all the stakeholders, if you're struggling with your local highway, like you have to have your Department of Transportation representative in that conversation. Springdale, Utah, and their Zion Regional Collaborative has done a great job with this. They brought UDOT in pretty early in the process. They were able actually to get a really cool grant and shuttle system expansion because they were working with that transportation partner and making sure they were in the room. Another cool example of this is actually the Sustainable Tourism and Outdoor Recreation Committee in Gunnison Valley, Colorado. So with Crested Butte, Gunnison County is a pretty large county in Colorado. This committee has representatives from the county, but every single municipality in the county, as well as the Forest Service, the Park Service, the BLM, their local DMO, their local stock growers association, their local mountain bike association. And so getting, kind of the cattlemen and the mountain bikers in the same room to talk about like, where do we want to build trails? Where are the trails causing challenges? Where do we build new trails? Where do we not build trails because of where people are grazing their cattle or because of where there's sensitive wildlife habitat? And it's a really cool example of regional collaboration. And this is actually a quote from one of the county commissioners. If you start in the middle, then after you develop relationships, then you can explore the edges a little and talk about the hard things, really starting in the middle with those really tense conflict-filled situations. And then finally, charting your gnarly future, really just helping participants understand that you can make a plan, and there's like an Eisenhower quote, plans are futile, but planning is everything. Plans don't always, they're not going to be executed perfectly, but planning itself and really thinking about the future and understanding that it's uncertain, even if you do make a plan, really reckoning with that uncertainty and also trying to empower yourself is really important, and one thing we wanted to leave participants with. So like really starting now and not avoiding difficult conversations. There's a great quote from the former Park City planning director: the best time to start building housing was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. So kind of our long-term vision for NAR Academy. So we have this fundamentals course. It's what we kicked off with the NITC grant and a couple other grants that we got through USU Extension. And then we're hoping to keep building this into a bigger library, a bigger online course library that folks can do. So the bold ones here are courses we actually already have some resources around. So strategic short-term rental management, protecting dark skies, active transportation. We had a couple students who gave us a great groundwork to get that project going someday when we get resources to build the course. And actually, a month ago, we got our first grant, and we're going to build our first deep dive course around strategic short-term rental management. We got the grant from the Utah Ombudsman Office, so it's going to have a Utah emphasis within it. However, all of the lessons are going to share kind of the structure around the Intermountain West with really like, what are short-term rentals? What are some of the impacts they have, and how can communities both manage them and also leverage them to their maximum benefit so that they are fully giving back what they can to the community through that economic activity. And I think we're at time, so I'll skip that. And that's the end of our slides. So yeah, I think we can take questions for a few minutes here. And if you want to follow us on LinkedIn, we got a QR code. We have a LinkedIn page. We share cool articles.
Great. Great. Thanks for a great presentation. We do have a question in the Q&A, and folks, feel free to add more questions if you have them. This question is from Jason. My emphasis as an economist is to focus on trade-offs that create improvements for all individuals involved. Congestion pricing carefully crafted may incentivize individuals to visit less frequently on high demand days and weekend. It can provide revenue to provide for the needed government services for the added visitors. If revenue is more than needed for services, incentive programs to draw visitors when the community has comfortable capacity to host more visitors or customers. What do you think?
I'm just reading it again.
Yeah, I can start out, Liz, and then I can kind of go from there. I think some of the things that were coming to mind in particular were, right. So when you're trying to think of strategies to kind of mitigate the impacts both on the residents and also on the visitors, what comes to mind for me and looking at that question is particularly around like timed entry systems that some of our national parks have been experimenting with to try to figure out how do they still enable people to access these places, but also limit what that looks like. Because when you've got so many individuals, it just kind of ruins the experience for everyone. And there have been a number of national parks that have been kind of grappling with this and sort of seeing what works and what doesn't. In particular, Arches National Park will be presenting in our conference in Base Camp, talking exactly about this and the struggles that they have navigated through in that. And I think that whenever we're trying to kind of figure out measures or tactics to kind of navigate these challenges, I think coming back to sort of an assessment process of figuring out like what actually are the struggles. I mean, I think, with us in Utah, like the majority of our main streets for our small communities are owned by UDOT. And so whenever our communities are trying to interact with their downtown spaces or main street areas, they're then interacting with UDOT. And for the longest time, it was kind of all centered on how much traffic do you move and when does it go? And that was sort of the framework. And for UDOT, they've realized, especially over the last couple of years, they're like, oh yeah, like maybe some of our communities like don't actually care so much about like the, all those tactics around moving people as fastly as possible. And some of our communities have actually been like, hey, actually, we want to take our 4 lanes and put them down to 2. And UDOT's like, what? Like, how does that make any sense? And so I think, there are great incentive programs to kind of, figure out what measures could be taken to mitigate those impacts. I would just say that on top of that, trying to take an assessment of really figuring out what are the struggles of your community right now, what is their capacity in the future, how do they want to grow, and even if they can accommodate more visitors and more users, is that something that the community actually wants to take on? And there's so many layers within it. It's a super complex thing, but that's kind of what comes to mind on my end. I wish I was more of a transportation expert, but I am a facilitator and a community planner, so I don't get to get in the weeds with it that much. But based on what we've been observing in Utah, those are kind of some of my insights with just measures of trying to figure out how to relieve traffic congestion and increase visitors. How about you, Liz? Any other?
Yeah, no, I think the timed entry. So Arches National Park did it. Rocky Mountain's been doing it a couple of years. Yosemite's doing it this year. So like between the hours of, Yosemite's might actually be all day, but for Rocky Mountain and Arches, like between the hours of 8 o'clock and 3 o'clock p.m., you have a certain window in which your vehicle can enter the park. And you can show up before 8 o'clock and you can show up after 3 p.m. to kind of keep it so everyone can visit the park. But during those really crazy hours, there aren't, 300 cars trying to fit into 25 spaces. And so they're parking along the vegetation, they're damaging the resource. The challenge with that, to your point about providing revenue for the local community to handle some of the traffic is that doesn't necessarily feed back into the community. The one example I've seen of a community trying to disincentivize driving a personal vehicle, especially during peak times, is Springdale. They were that photo that Jordan shared, with the cars everywhere parked on the red rock and the sand. The entire town of Springdale now has paid parking on both sides of the street, and you can take the shuttle. There are shuttle stops all the way back to St. George now that will now come to the park, which is great. and to really encourage people staying in hotels in St. George not to drive your personal vehicle. Please take the shuttle, because of that paid parking, and that revenue does go back into the community to help, repave the road, because when you're a town of 500 and you see 2 million vehicles, your road gets beat up more than the normal town of 500's road. And they worked with UDOT really carefully on that, to see what would happen. And, the challenge with a place like Zion and some of the, Colorado mountain communities are the same way, where it's kind of a funnel and there's an end. Like Zion is a 7-mile canyon and you drive into the canyon and everyone who drives in has to drive out. So there's a traffic jam sometimes over a mile long. Same with, getting up to the ski resort. It's at the top of the mountain in the valley and you got to eventually come back down. The red snake, I think, is a lot of skiers call it, coming back down the canyon, all the tail lights. And so that is an area, like managing traffic, managing visitation, especially as these places get more and more popular, and managing that in a way that gives back to the community, is an area I think there could be a lot more work done, honestly. And I would love to see more innovative ways to have that feedback in. So those are my
And
thoughts.
I will say too that UDOT in particular, I think it was some point between 2015, maybe 2017, UDOT had decided to hire community planners to then start to look more holistically at these particular challenges, which has been really incredible. So they've got 4 regions in our state. And so we'll go to these local meetings like the Zion Regional Collaborative Liza just mentioned, and other community gathering spaces, just to kind of start to sort of see all these different facets outside of just the transportation component. Because if there's anything that we've learned from the studies, it's that housing, transportation, land use, it's all interconnected. It all impacts each other so much. And so we've been really excited to see that kind of approach done by UDOT in our state. And yeah, would love to see if that would happen in a number of other ones too.
Great, thank you. Next question is from Armin. Should unincorporated communities make an effort to incorporate? And how do residents in unincorporated communities feel about it?
Ooh, okay. That is a hot button question. That the most recent example I've kind of seen of this is Gardner, Montana. So outside of Yellowstone National Park on the Montana side. So Gardner has had a lot of conversations since 2020. Actually, they hired a local nonprofit called Future West to do some community visioning with them, called Successful Gardner. It was a really cool process. But one of the suggestions was, maybe incorporation makes sense. A lot of Montana's gateway communities are actually unincorporated, and so they are dependent on the county for resources and for their planning efforts. They often don't even have a community plan, and the tension with that incorporate versus unincorporate is unincorporation for these more rural Western communities who have kind of, we talk a lot about like Old West, New West. So the Old West is that agricultural, mining, extractive history that is the heritage of a lot of these communities. And the New West is the amenity, tourism, recreation, economic activity that's happening now. And the two butt heads sometimes. And for a lot of people who live in unincorporated places, one of the things they appreciate about that is kind of the freedom they have in that. Counties often have fewer restrictions. They often don't have very many ordinances. And that's one of the things they really love about their place. And so the challenges communities in Idaho are seeing as well is when there are few restrictions, it's great for what you want to do with your place, but it also means everyone around you can also do whatever they want. And when the farmer next door sells their 500 acres and now it's going to be, 250 homes, that's not what you expected living in the county. But that is what is happening in a lot of these really high demand, high amenity places. And so that incorporation versus unincorporate conversation is happening, and it's pretty challenging. I know that Gardner actually put forward to the county to create their first zoning plan to decide where homes could or could not be built to try and preserve open space. And there were members in the community that challenged that. And I haven't entirely seen how that shook out. Jordan, if you are aware of how that's shaken out, but it's that tension between people really liking the place they are. It feels like home to them because of how it was. And also, how do they preserve what's most important to them into the future, and while also navigating that's a change as well. And so that's not a very firm answer because it's so community by community dependent. But incorporation does come with benefits and more control that the community can have more of a say over what happens in its vicinity than unincorporation, where you are dependent on the county for that. And that's something a lot of places are wrestling with.
Mhm.
What do you think, Jordan?
Yeah, just kind of, I mean, similar, Liz. I mean, I think, yeah, you do get a lot of power when you're able to incorporate, and also it requires a lot of responsibility. And I forget the name. There was a small community in Utah that was trying to incorporate a couple of years ago. And I remember there was a lot of drama around it because it was like, you know, they wanted it. They didn't really talk about what that actually meant. And then all of a sudden they were like, oh my goodness, all these responsibilities are now on us. How do we do this? How do we navigate this? And so I think, you know, there's one thing to want to have more power and say, perhaps, in contrast, especially if your county is kind of going in a different direction than your community is. And also you have to have that capacity up front to be able to handle and navigate through those challenges. So I think it really comes down to what kind of support, if any, do you have with your county, and what does that relationship look like? And also the size of your counties. I mean, what, Texas has got like over 200 counties, you know, but they're at all different scales and different sizes, you know, in all different states. And so I think too, I mean, golly, like how big is our San Juan County down in southeastern Utah? It's huge. So that's another piece of it too, is that, you know, you may have this county that is able to support your unincorporated area, but I mean, they've got a long, long way to go. And there's, you know, there could be a number of unincorporated communities. So yeah, really case by case basis. And I think Liz really laid out a lot of the concerns and advantages and disadvantages of it. But yeah, sometimes it works really well. Sometimes it doesn't. Just kind of depends what you're deciding on.
Thank you. Well, we are almost at time. I'll give it another few seconds in case anyone's typing a question right now. I don't want to cut them off, but thank you both for a really great presentation, really engaging and interesting. And again, for those watching, there will be a recording and a copy of this slide deck in the email that you'll receive within 24 hours. Right. Thank you, everyone. And that concludes our webinar. So I will sign off and have a good day.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
See you.